This is the decisively long review of all new PR9 ships, going in the order of Max Immelman, Valparaiso, Takahashi, Uraj, and finally Duncan. I will neither confirm nor deny that it's in order of strength. First, an announcement in case you're still not using my tier list for some reason. I've added precise damage numbers for all 800 plus main fleet and vanguard ships. Before, all you knew was that Fritz has a 4 in light damage, which is somewhere in the top 4 to 12% of main fleet ships. Now notice how the percentile bar has become much narrower. Fritz does 3,418 damage per second against light, which is in the top 5 to 6% of main fleet ships. Similarly, heavy damage has gone from between 5 and 11%, which is a 6% range, to precisely pinned down to around top 10%. If anything in the following video is unclear, then first see if the tier list can answer it, then write a comment if not, because the tier list does have a lot of information. First is Max Immelman. Flights for ships are somewhat becoming obsolete because so much information is available to you on the tier list already. For example, every ship's personal DPS, as well as their recommended gear. I'll just add a slide for relevant example fleets for the relevant ships, such as Max Immelman. Also note that we are rating PR9's performance and synergy now based on the current game meta, but it will take over 2 months for the fastest players to get them to Dev 30. It might even take you 3 to 6 months. And who knows what JP anniversary in 2 months will bring, or even EN anniversary next month might have a rainbow retrofit. So going right to the tier list, defining a completely new tier of damage for carriers upon her release, Max Immelman is a very straightforward damage dealer. I'm going to focus on her performance in bossing because that's where she goes above and beyond, but Max is also no slouch in campaign at top 3 to 5% of carriers. Of main fleet ships, actually. Now, what exactly is the damage difference between Max and the second strongest carrier? We can go to list view, select the average damage and light, medium, heavy damage columns, and sort by each of the columns. And we're looking at carriers only. So what we see is Max first, the rest nowhere. 22% higher light DPS than Lexington II, 38% higher medium DPS than Fritz, and 10% higher heavy DPS than Hakuho. If we look at the average damage across the 3 armor types, this is 44% higher DPS than the second place Amagi CV. In my poll, 17% of voters chose the correct answer, but I think it's only that high because many voters got some idea from other sources like Jimmy. These were the earlier poll results after 1 day, and only 12% of people chose over 40% damage. If I may make a half joke, Kimochi's watchers choose the top 2 wrong options, Jimmy watchers choose the bottom 2 correct options. Even including battleships, Max Immelman is first place by overall damage across the 3 armor types, only losing to Lion and Guts in light damage. And that's the whole kit. Max Immelman does damage and only does damage. She is certainly the strongest CV in a variety of situations, raises the ceiling of carrier fleets, and also can substitute for Fritz in double BB fleets against light or medium, for example Bristol meta, although Bristol meta will be gone by the time you get Max Immelman Dev 30. Actually, even at Dev 25, Max Immelman is the top carrier for damage, but with a missing damage margin in fleet buffs, she's not beating the existing carriers at Dev 25. So this is an example anti-light fleet, and here she's replacing Fritz, although Fritz does have an 8% fleet damage buff, so Max Immelman only raises this fleet's damage by a little, if at all. Here's an example 2 carrier medium bossing fleet, and it happens to be a faction main fleet. Fritz needs the double BFG to get 4 strikes in meta showdown, and Max Immelman can afford to take 1 LA9, and because the carriers are all using rockets instead of torpedo bombers, this fleet doesn't need a full freeze, it only needs some minor Trafalgar slow. 15% is good enough for most of the rockets to hit, especially if the boss itself is sitting still for most of the battle like most bosses in meta showdown do. Here's another example anti-medium fleet, and it's triple carrier this time, and it happens to be another faction fleet. Although faction fleets are usually quite bad, this one is actually somewhat decent because you can use Peter Strasser's carrier reload bonus to fit 5 LA9s into this fleet and still be able to get 4 strikes in meta showdown, although it does require full loading and max tech. And also imagine having 5 plus 13 LA9s. The same fleet with airplane adjustments can also work for heavy armor bosses, and same deal, faction fleet is just for fun, but this one is still quite strong. And again, same deal, this fleet does need max O's and max reload tech, especially now that you're using torpedo bombers and the TOW 152 skip bomber. You'll want Peter Strasser especially to go last in the airstrike order so that she can freeze for the other two. So as the highest damage carrier in the game, does Max Moman revive the carrier fleets? And unfortunately the answer is not really. At best, carrier fleets are competitive with BBs against medium, but triple BB or double BB fleets still dominate light and heavy armor. And why is that? To fix carrier fleets, one or more of the following need to be released in the next few months. First is a fast and high damage airplane. Carriers still struggle with 4 strikes and meta showdown, which is the most difficult endgame bossing content. Lexington 2's VBF-94 was a great addition as an extremely fast, low damage plane, but the problem is that it has low damage, and CVs are still unable to use the Focke-Wulf U2 or Ryusei Kai instead of Sayun to get 4 strikes. The second option is a vanguard ship who favors carriers. Kazagumo has long been power crept from the top, and Trafalgar is super meta right now, but only if the flagship has main guns, which means battleship fleet. Maybe you can consider a fleet with 1 battleship and 2 carriers as a carrier fleet, and in that fleet a Trafalgar would work, but still carriers struggle from the lack of a fast and high damage airplane to get 4 strikes. Some other meta vanguard ships like William D. Porter is only exceptional in Eagle Union anti-light fleet, which is not good for medium or heavy. Trafalgar's Z-52 and Porter in non-Eagle Union fleets in general help BBs as much as CVs, so that doesn't fix the power imbalance between BBs and CVs in bossing. A third problem that carriers have right now is that the strong freezers are pretty restricted, like Lexington 2 is restricted to light, and Nakhimov is restricted to Moskva and kind of medium and heavy. And I would say that the first problem is the most important problem to fix right now, followed by good vanguard ships, followed by a good freezer. Now I need to hurry up, and the rest of the ships don't need slides. Valparaiso's specialty is her minor healing and strong long-range secondary guns like Omi. These are DD caliber secondaries. Neither her equipment slots nor her barrage has CA caliber secondaries. Basically, Valparaiso is Raffaello with more damage and less healing. Her campaign performance is unknown, specifically due to how differently her damage is distributed, but she'll very probably be around the level of Musashi and Raffaello, which is to say top 3 BBs in campaign. In campaign, we use fast DD guns to proc her healing more. That means she has poor bombing ship defense in the first 20 seconds of the battle, but this is a necessary cost to improve both healing and bombing ship defense later in the battle. Using this twin 100 Kai, she can fire 20 salvos in around 9 seconds, which means a 15% self-heal at 20 seconds, and then 5% self-heal every 9 seconds after that. And she will heal one other ship for 8% at 38 seconds, and once again at 56 seconds, and then most campaign battles are over by then. In bossing like Omi, her performance heavily depends on whether the boss is sitting still for most of the battle. To maximize her damage, these are the best secondary guns, and it's the same for all armor types because she changes the secondary gun shell to a special HE. These ratings assume the boss is moving half the time at 25 speed. If the boss is always moving, then Valparaiso's DPS drops to the 3000s, which is like Raffaello but worse because she doesn't heal or buff as much as Raffaello does. On the other hand, if the boss is always sitting still, then she goes up to 5000 DPS, which would make her almost comparable to Lion in Guts, and indeed comparable top 3 if the healing is needed or helpful. In Meta Showdown, the most relevant endgame bossing content, the developers really like making the bosses sit still for half the battle, and Valparaiso has very high reload so she can fit 4 main gun salvos easily, so I'll rate Valparaiso as a top 5 bossing BB and a top 3 campaign BB. Takahashi is Shimanto with more damage but without the fire extinguishing. Indeed, I have heard that in World of Warships, Takahashi is Shimanto's successor in the same tech tree line, and they play the same way. In Azur lane, I would not call Takahashi stronger than Shimanto. That would be reserved for next year when Takahashi gets her Fate simulation. In short, both of them have very good anti-air, good damage, and good survivability. Shimanto's fire extinguishing is actually quite strong, so I leave Takahashi lower than Shimanto in campaign for now. Meanwhile, Takahashi's higher damage and 40% desynced slow earn her a slightly higher tier than Shimanto in bossing, although neither of them is particularly noteworthy in bossing. For the gear, although Takahashi's in-game skill description claims that she needs Sakura Empire gear to get the shield and barrage, the game is wrong and the barrage is always granted, so she only slightly prefers to use at least one Sakura Empire gear, one of these green highlights, or a minor shield. Basically, if you have the top row of options, you can just ignore that part of her skill and give up the shield. There's actually not much to say about Uraj except that she has a lot of cool torpedo and thunderstorm barrages. She has decent damage and survivability, like Vittorio Cuniverti with less damage and more tankiness. As a standard destroyer with no specialization, Uraj is good in Chapter 14 but bad in Chapter 15 and up because she has really terrible anti-air. Last and least, we have Duncan. With how unimpressive she is for a new gold ship, Duncan makes really good material for the HMS fans to cry about Ironblood bias once again. Part of her barrage is not centered, meaning that it misses more if she's not the flagship. However, another part of her skill says that she wants to be the flagship. You can view it as picking a poison, or you can view it as picking a sweet. I'm leaning more towards poison, considering that this ship is just not as strong as some other PR battleships or battlecruisers like Monarch, Georgia, Gasconia, and Dyson. I will tell you though that she does more damage by not being the flagship. If you put her as flagship, then you subtract about 100 DPS from each of these numbers. However, if you use her in campaign as the only BB or BC in the fleet, then you'll still have to put her as flagship to shoot suicide boats. So similar to PR8, in PR9 we have some really strong rainbow ships and some good, mediocre, or bad gold ships.